Imagine you're strapped into a metal coffin with wings. It's June 1943, and you've just climbed into a B-17 flying fortress. 10 men jammed into a cavernous fuselage built to carry ton after ton of bombs into the heart of enemy territory. Outside, the sky is bruised with cold. Inside, the world is a tangle of wiring, guns, radios, and the constant hiss of oxygen. You don't laugh, you don't eat much, and you don't pretend this is anything but a mission to the gates of hell, and, if you're lucky, back again. The B-17 was one of the marvels of 1940s engineering, a 4-engine, long-range heavy bomber designed to cruise high, carry heavy loads, and survive punishment. Its airframe was redundant by design, multiple wings, multiple systems, armor plate where it mattered, and every square inch of it bristled with guns. The late-war B-17G could mount a dozen-plus 50-caliber machine guns in positions from nose to tail, forming a defensive web that, when flown in tight combat formation, could put up a blistering curtain of lead. That defensive firepower earned the fortress its name, and it let crews believe they had a shot when fighters came. But none of that changes the truth. Flying a combat mission in a B-17 was terrifying, uncomfortable, and often fatal. High, cold, and thin air. B-17s habitually climbed into the thin upper air, 20,000 to 30,000 feet on many missions, where the oxygen is scarce and the temperature plummets to extremes. The fortress was not a pressurized ship. Crews wore oxygen masks and heavy electrically heated flight suits to survive the cold that could drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius and below. Those suits kept fingers and faces from icing, but they were far from foolproof. Hoses kinked, generators failed, and thin gloves made every fiddly task a gamble. Lose oxygen flow, and you become drowsy within seconds. Unchecked, unconsciousness follows, and then death in minutes. Frostbite cost men fingers and toes. There are veteran accounts of airmen losing nails and tips to the cold, or of blood that stiffened as it left a wound. Small things, a jammed gun, a broken switch, became life and death maintenance jobs in the worst possible conditions. The 2-engine rule and the box of death. B-17s flew in dense formations, the famous combat box. Tight ranks of heavy bombers presented overlapping fields of fire, so each aircraft's gunners could cover its neighbor's blind spots. Close formation was the fortress's primary defense. The idea was simple and terrifyingly fragile. Stay in formation, and the enemy would have to fly through a wall of 50 cal. Fail to form up or be blown out of position, and you become easy meat.
Getting into formation was itself hazardous. Planes took off in rapid succession, sometimes 30 seconds apart. Navigation and timing had to be perfect. Training and ferry flights accounted for a grim toll. Accidents, mid-air collisions, and mechanical failures killed thousands of aircrew in the U.S. Army Air Force's massive training pipeline. Many crews did not survive training, and many more would not survive a first full tour. Flak, a cloud that eats planes. If the cold and formation were one hazard, German gunners were another. The flak networks that ringed high-value targets were designed to burst at set altitudes and spray deadly fragmentation across the sky. The feared German 88mm battery could reach the altitudes at which fortresses cruised. Even near misses shredded control cables, punched fuel tanks, and turned fabric and aluminum into Swiss cheese. The psychological effect was as lethal as the metal. You could see the puffs blooming around you, watch planes break up or fall away in flame, and never know whether the next burst would be your end. Flak was indiscriminate and unforgiving. It made every mission a roll of brutal roulette. Enemy fighters, the knife in the flank. Early in the daylight strategic campaign, the Allies hoped that the B-17's guns and formation would be enough.
The reality proved otherwise. German fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s, attacked in coordinated waves, using head-on passes to target the cockpit and engines, and yanking around to rake waist and tail positions. Until long-range escorts arrived, the P-51 Mustang changed the equation. Many bomber formations flew dozens of missions without fighter cover, and losses soared. Fighters didn't always need to score a direct kill. They tore control surfaces, set fires, or knocked out oxygen and hydraulics, anything that would turn a heavy bomber into a falling coffin. Positions of horror, and the men who manned them. A B-17 had no safe chair, but some places were worse than others. The waist gunners worked in narrow openings, kneeling or standing on cramped floors to fire twin 50 cal guns through open windows. They were exposed to the slipstream and the cold, and they had only light armor and a thin fuselage between them and a 20mm shell. They were also vulnerable to mid-air collisions or structural failure. If the plane broke up, waist gun positions were among the first to be lost.
The top turret and chin turret gunners were highly exposed visually and often drew the first strikes from attacking fighters. But the ball turret, the spherical belly-mounted gun emplacement, entered the popular imagination as the symbol of the crewman's worst fate. The ball was a claustrophobic metal globe that folded down out of the belly. The gunner crawled in, legs tucked, with instruments around him. It was cold, cramped, and isolated. The ball gunner was physically separated from most of the crew and depended on hydraulics and structural integrity to get out. If the turret jammed or the aircraft spun rapidly, escape could be impossible. The image of a ball turret gunner trapped or lost in a crashing fortress is one of the war's most haunting. Other roles brought their own terrors. The bombardier sat forward in an exposed nose compartment. The navigator and radio operator battled instruments and static under fire. The pilot and co-pilot kept the wrecked machine level with 2 engines on fire and the controls half gone. Everyone wore parachutes and hoped there would be time and altitude to use them. When a ship is hit, the calculus of survival. There was no set script for what happened after a hit. If the aircraft was still controllable, the crew would fight, feathering dead engines, fighting fires, nursing hydraulics, and riding a burning machine home if they could. Damage control was a frantic professional choreography. A gunner would fight his turret, a flight engineer would plug holes when possible, and the pilot would head for friendly lines. If the plane was fatally wounded, fuel alight, control surfaces shredded, the order to bail out went up. Bailouts at altitude were perilous. Freezing air, tangled aircraft, and injured crew made escape chaotic. Over enemy territory, there was the grim prospect of capture and prisoner of war camps. Over the Channel or North Sea, the water was as lethal as the flak. Air-sea rescue did save some men, but many were never found. And some planes exploded with such suddenness that there was no warning at all. Entire crews were vaporized in mid-air when fuel tanks or bomb loads burned. Others went down in slow plummets that felt like an eternity, each second a test of nerve and training. Courage and the human calculus. Numbers don't capture the human truth. Most bomber crews were young, often barely out of their teens, and they knew the math was against them. The U.S. 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command suffered appalling losses in different theaters and periods. Surviving a single tour was never guaranteed, and many airmen learned to write letters home in case this flight was their last.
Yet the story is not only one of terror, it's one of discipline, skill, and quiet courage. Tight formation flying, gunnery, crew drills, replacing oxygen masks under fire, fighting flames, and tending injured shipmates. These were ordinary acts of extraordinary bravery. Crews became families. Their survival often depended on the man to their left and right keeping his head. The flying fortress could be a death sentence, but it was also a machine that saved lives by absorbing punishment and bringing men home when lesser aircraft would never have had the chance. The evolution of protection, lessons paid in blood. Long-range fighter escorts eventually tamed the skies. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang with drop tanks and the range to reach Berlin tore away German air superiority and dramatically cut bomber losses. Technology and tactics changed. Better armor plating, chin turrets to defend the vulnerable nose, more reliable engines, and improved oxygen systems reduced some risks, but the core facts remained. Strategic daylight bombing was hazardous and expensive in lives and machines, and demanded the very best its crews could give. If you want to understand the scale of what these air crews did, imagine standing in that narrow cockpit as the fortress shudders under flak. Feel the cold up your sleeves, smell fuel and hydraulic fluid, and look out to see a wing torn, a plane falling, and the sky suddenly full of black puffs. Then imagine trying to steady your hands and bring that battered airplane home while 10 young lives hang on your judgment. That was the daily calculus of the B-17 crew. The Flying Fortress lived up to its nickname, sturdy, bristling with guns, and able to survive punishment. But it's a mistake to think of it as a safe ship. For its crews, every mission was a gamble with split-second decisions and a high cost for error. Their courage wasn't a heroic flourish, it was a habit learned on cold metal benches at 25,000 feet, and it was bought in the blood of a generation. If you want a follow-up, we can deep dive into a single mission, a crew roster, the pre-flight jokes, the climb, the flak over the target, the fighter attacks, and the long ride home, minute by minute, to see what survival actually looked like in the air war over Europe. Which raid should we replay next?